let me talk to you a little bit about the last thing. I'm looking at my, I think I'm going to allow you enough time. Remember, the third principle was Calvin shows us that pastors need far more intense, in-service, ongoing, lifetime training than they're getting. We load all that into seminary, and then we get out there, and you're very fortunate if you occasionally come to a conference like this. You're very fortunate if you might have some kind of local ministerial association or a network that you get together with. But let me tell you what Calvin did. Maybe now, if you were, again, if you were at Scott's workshop, you would have heard about this, but I'll just take 2 minutes on it. Every Friday, Calvin called together what he called the Venerable Company of Pastors. And these were all the pastors, not only in the city of Geneva, but actually even in the environs. So it was really Geneva and the environment, what we would call the suburbs, but that wouldn't be fair because that's not what those things were. But anyway, all the pastors in an area, probably 20, 30 pastors. And every Friday, this is what happened. From 8 o'clock in the morning to 9:30, they had what was called their public conference. I have no idea what the French term was, but I'm not even going to try. The public conference. And what you did for that hour and a half was some pastor basically did an exposition. It wasn't so much a full sermon. It was a little bit more like an exposition, the basis for a future sermon. So what they did was they worked through whole books of the Bible. Each week, a new pastor would come and give an exposition. They did their exegesis, and they presented their exposition. It was kind of like a sermon, but it was more like the bones of a sermon without a whole lot of the other accoutrements you'd put in. And there would be one person who preached for maybe 30 minutes, and then there would be one pastor who was designated to respond, to add, to correct, to make suggestions, to maybe challenge the interpretation of that passage, or to affirm it. And then other pastors would chime in, and usually Calvin would get up at the very end and give his thoughts on the text, and this was open to the public. So the pastors got together, and they in a sense did practice preaching. What was the purpose of this? Because maybe a year from now or 2 years from now, they would all work through that book. But they were working through the book now, making sure they were on the same page in the way in which they interpreted the book. Learning how to do preaching, in a sense, was practice preaching. And it was open to the public. So generally the most, the more, there's always Christians who are the most interested in growing. And so probably more of the eager and more mature lay people would show up. So on Friday mornings from 8 to 9:30, all the pastors got together and took turns preaching through parts of the Bible and then responding to one another and doing critique, and Calvin would get up and everybody would be there then. At the end of the conference, from 9:30 to noon, they went into private. In the private, sometimes they did a little bit more sharp correction or critique of the sermon than they might have done in public.